That's actually amazing.
Yeah.
Like so
I
many
don't know,
places
it's
in the world,
everything
like
around bathroom,
like
but
yeah.
I
No,
guess.
sanitation is amazing. Like we have to be more grateful for
Yeah,
sanitation.
that's true.
Hey Matt,
Hey, team.
what you got?
Today, I'd like to continue the conversation we started last time, related to traveling and how traveling affects your life and people around
Part
you.
two.
Part two, yes. Yeah. Let's see what comes out of it. So last time we kind of like touched upon the impacts of traveling more on a general, in a general way, right? Like talking about how you can learn from meeting new cultures. Traveling is also that. Traveling is also a way to learn about yourself. Very important. And we talked about traveling solo, yeah. But this time, I guess it'd be fun for us, first of all, and for maybe somebody else, to listen to some of our experiences, because we traveled quite a lot, I think. I'm not one of those people that like, when I was a kid, I started like listing the countries I went to because I wanted like to fill up the entire.
You stopped doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I never got to actually like. Are you doing it?
I think I last updated maybe a year or two ago. I mean, I tried off the top of my head. Like at some point, I decided I wanted to make a list because I hadn't been tracking until I was like, I don't know, 30 or something. And then I decided I want to know how many countries I've been to. And then I made a list, but I don't even know if it's accurate or not because like I don't even remember all of them. And then you don't know, do I count the ones when I was a kid, you know?
Of course you do. You were still you, right?
Well, actually, there was some trips that I did when I was like 1 year old, so I don't know if that counts.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
Still alive in this world. I mean, you were breathing. It was fine. No, but I think the problem with me was when I started, I went into the rabbit hole. Okay, let's find the perfect, of course, right? Let's find the perfect app for this to also count miles, because
of course, yeah, you have the perfect app for everything. Yeah.
There was a time where like there was this thing of like collecting your flights to see how many miles you travel and things like that. Interesting stats, but it's more the effort than the value.
Are you collecting miles?
Not really. Not really. I should. I guess it's a good.
Well, in the States, it's really nice. I think in Europe, it's less useful because in the States, they have all these like special credit cards that give you miles with different airlines. You can like really.
You can transform them into the.
I got like a lot of miles with United back in the day. I still have a bunch of them, but that was super nice. Like you just open the right credit card, then you fly with them, and then
Did you ever get a flight with miles? I don't think I've ever.
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, then
my Corona flight, which probably I could have like my Corona flight because I was traveling. You know, I was traveling in Asia when Corona started. I was like patient zero in Malaysia, almost. I think I told you the story.
Yeah.
But I probably could have gotten like one of those government flights back. I had some friends that did it, but I actually used my miles. Maybe I should have used a government flight. But you know.
No, at least you used the miles. Because the problem is they expire, right?
Not anymore. Not with United, but like some of the depends on the company. United now they don't expire, which is really nice.
Yeah, I used to have a bunch on like Korean Air when I was back in Korea, and like they expired. And then I have a bunch on Lufthansa. They expire. So at this point, I'm like,
I think you just have to open a mileage account with, like all the alliances. They share the miles, so you just have to pick an airline within each of the big three alliances because there's three that where they don't expire. So for me, that's United for Star Alliance, and they don't expire.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a trick, you see. But yeah, so ultimately, I kind of like stop tracking. Also because then you get to this thing of like crossing off the list. I think we talked about it in other scenarios, right? Like it's not really a good. Yeah. Last time we talked about the fact that when you travel and this checklist of touristic sightseeing places. It becomes like you lose the being in the present aspect of it, which is really most of the value. And like, you start like.
I think that's the general thing. Is as soon as you like start counting stuff, like be it likes on social media or countries you've been to or whatever, like you tend to do that. I still do it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so it's interesting, and also that connects to the other day I was listening to psychiatrist like in TV, like he was talking. I think he wrote a book. Of course, I don't remember the title, but it was about is an Italian psychiatrist, and he was talking how uh, this is a society of like superficiality. That's what he said. Of course, then you ask what's his age, and he's not young. And then there's always this feeling of like looking back at the older younger generation and thinking like, oh, they're more superficial than we were. I don't know if that's really the case. We're going in that direction.
Yeah.
But not to skew things up too much in this discussion. But the interesting thing was, related to traveling, I guess, the fact that I think that's another feature of traveling. Like it grounds you to experience things more firsthand instead of like this passive consumption of other people's experiences, right? And so yeah, you have a breadth of experiences in the place where you live, but then at some point, as we said last time, like you need to like change air a bit, and like and so new first-hand experiences like expand your sense of time and like generally are just good for mental health probably. But yeah, I was curious about you had a trip recently that lasted quite a while.
Well, actually, it was many trips. Yeah. I think it goes back to kind of like the thing I said last time, which is I used to be okay with discomfort. And so, for example, my longest trip was around 9 months, and that was my trip from Europe to Asia by land. So, like, took the train from Germany through Siberia to China and then down to Southeast Asia. That took around 9 months, but there was a lot of discomfort on the way because like there was never a time where you could just, I mean, there was times where, checked into a hotel and was like just taking it easy, but you were never home, right? And recently, and I know it's worse for the environment, but I've been flying back and forth a lot. Even though I was basically gone for 3 months, I was always home for like 3 days in between, kind of to reset. And I'm actually happy I did it, even though I don't like flying, both for personal reasons and, for the environment. But it did feel good to be home, to reset every couple of weeks, to do your laundry, to like have a good night's sleep and all these things. So yeah, it wasn't one long trip. It was many trips that added up to like 3 months or 2 or 3 months. Yeah.
But that 9-month trip of the past, like your plan was to do a full year, right? Or not?
I didn't have a plan. I started it with my then girlfriend, and we actually split up on the way. I always say if a couple does a world trip together, either they split up on the way or they get married after, because like you're like really forced to get to know the other person very intimately, traveling together like that. But no, there was no timeline. I thought about a year, but then after 9 months, Corona came, and then it was kind of like I gave myself kind of like a threshold for COVID cases to decide that I'm going to go back home. And that's what I did also. But it coincided with me being kind of traveled out. I was in Malaysia at the time. And I think I may have told you the story how I was like patient zero in this like weird hospital in Malacca, being the only patient in the high security wing. That was really funny. It wasn't super funny at the time, but now it's funny. Yeah, I was like only planning to go to Indonesia for sure after that, and I wanted to go to Indonesia. And I was gonna go by boat, and I was actually not really feeling it because I was like, I had to go to Sumatra with the boat because my whole plan was not to take any planes. And I was like, oh, then I'm gonna be in the middle of Sumatra, and there's like barely any infrastructure, and I have to go by bus down to Java, and I was like, oh, I'm not really feeling it. And then Corona came, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go back home. But I'm actually going to Indonesia this winter, so I'm finally going to end this trip. So I have a flight to Indonesia in December.
That's nice. So basically COVID brought you back home, although you kind of like wanted.
Yeah, I think it was like I guess it was serendipity for me. It was like I kind of wanted to stop the trip anyway, but I told myself I'll go to Indonesia, and then I decided. I actually had the visa for Indonesia and everything. I already paid the money. I already I already was in Malacca, which is where I was going to take the boat. And then I decided, fuck it, I'm going to fly back.
Yeah, makes sense. And then I don't know, like the experience I had when I had like not necessarily a long trip, but like a long time far from home. So it could be also living in another city, right, which we can talk about. But when you come back, I'm curious about your experience there, because I vividly remember every time I came back to my hometown to stay there for a while, and I had spent like maybe some 6 months, a year abroad, and it really changes. To me, it changes depending on where you come from, right? Like which city are you living to go back? Because if in case of like bigger cities, like the time I spent in New York, living there for a few years, then you go back, and my hometown is smaller, right? And so the feeling is like everything is slower, everything is kind of like I left it when I went away, and it was not a good feeling. And then kind of like I needed to recover from that feeling, which is very weird, I think, if you think about it. But on the other hand, there are, as you said, like situations where I don't know if it has too much about to do with like comfort of living, because in New York I wasn't necessarily living more comfortably than in my hometown, so it's not really the case. There's something else, because yes, if like I was traveling like in situations that like far from home, but in a different environment, then coming back was actually very nice, and being like, okay, I'm back in my not real life, but like, yeah, the feeling was also that like I'm back to normality, and I kind of needed that, right? So I don't know if you had similar experiences like coming back home.
Yeah, I think it's a tiny bit different between really traveling and having been somewhere because you moved there. So I think I definitely had the same thing for New York, because I think it's hard to not feel this after having spent a lot of time in New York, because everything's bigger in New York, right? Aside from, I think, some Asian cities, because I think there's some Asian cities that are just ridiculous, I think, in China, but even Malaysia and probably also in Japan and Korea, which I haven't been to. But I think in Europe in general, there aren't really, by those standards, there aren't really any big cities. Even here in Berlin, right? Berlin, by many measures, is maybe the biggest city in Europe, and at least one of the biggest cities. But it does feel tiny when you come back from, say, Shanghai and New York and so on, right? Because it's like there's barely any big buildings, and even though there's a lot of offers, it's like it doesn't feel cosmopolitan. It doesn't feel as busy, and that's true for most European cities, I think. And you come back and you feel like everyone's just a little bit behind. I don't know how to say it. It's like, especially when you come home from the United States, it's like Europe feels like it's behind, right?
Yeah, but then the question is that I think we can open on like here. There's a lot to say, because then the question is it really the case, or is it just perception, right? Because the main aspect with the US specifically, I think New York compared to other cities in the US, because they are deeply different, and I think you kind of lose a lot of the in other cities. I think you lose a lot of the effect that New York has. I mean in the US, right? So there's this aspect of Hollywood, right? Like movies make it look like everything you do, from the more mundane, like gonna go dry cleaning, right? Or doing my laundry, to going to a restaurant, to walking on the streets, right? It makes it look like okay, it's amazing doing it there. It's less amazing somewhere else, because right. But the problem is it's not the case, right? Laundry is actually, you could argue, probably in Berlin or in Milan, or in Paris, it's not less. It's actually nicer than in New York, right? You probably have better places.
I love how we're talking about laundry now.
Yeah, but it's always that fascinates me, because when I was there, I was like, I'm going to do my laundry here and it's amazing. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, it's still laundry. But why would I feel different? Right? Does it make sense?
I mean, so first of all, I don't know how it is in Milan, but do you go to the laundry place or do you do laundry at home? Because in Germany, everyone does laundry at home.
I do it at home. But then I have done, like, for instance, I lived in France, right?
Yeah.
I lived in Lyon. In Lyon, I didn't have at home like the wash machine.
Yeah.
And so I had to go to a cleaner.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a good example of like.
But I think, like, for example, like, I think there's some cultural things. Like, I think New York, most people don't have their own washing machine. Most people go to the, either they have it like a communal one in the building, or they go to the place.
That doesn't make it nicer. Like, that's
no, I'm not saying it's nicer. I think it's just different. Like, in Germany, everyone has their own washing machine. Everyone. Like, I don't think there's.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But then I think the problem is that, like, we're brainwashed by movies, and then in the movies you see, like, a nice movie, there's stuff happening at the laundromat, and then you're like, I remember, like, there's a very famous,
you meet people there.
Yeah, no, but not really. But it's like already it comes with the interior of the place, right, and the feeling that recalls in your mind. I think, like, for instance, there's a very popular TV show, used to be very popular back in the days, I think in late 80s, 90s, which is called Seinfeld, right? Seinfeld, very popular. I think a lot of people know about it. And it was like in New York, right? Yeah. And so you have literally, at least I remember one episode, which is fully shot in a laundry shop, right? I don't know how to call it. And then stuff happens. And then you're like, you associate the movie and the actors and the TV show that you like with that kind of interior, like the kind of place, which you don't have. Like, if you're European, that kind, it's, architecture changes, we know, place by place. That's another interesting aspect, right? So, like, you don't have that same place anywhere close to you. So you don't, so when you go, it's like getting into a movie scene because you've never been. I think that's a part of it.
Yeah.
But it's funny because it's a trick of your mind, because ultimately you're doing the same exact thing. Actually, is way more uncomfortable because, as you said, like, if you can do it at home, way better. You can do other things.
I mean, honestly, I kind of like the laundromats, but I think it's for the same reason that you're saying. I think there's some romantic connotation with the laundromats in the States, especially in New York. And I used to like it. I mean, it's kind of annoying, right? You have to bring your laundry there. Like, that part is annoying, but it does feel, I mean, maybe it is true. It does feel like a little bit like a movie, which I don't mind so much. I think it's kind of cute. But I mean, I think I don't know how it is for you, but for me, one of the reasons to move to New York was because I kind of fell in love with the city through television, right?
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't know. I think
it's not bad.
Yeah, I think the things I was more referring to is that, I mean, I think Europe in particular is super behind on tech stuff, right? So, I mean, both Asia and the US, I think, are more advanced on many fronts. I think, well, there's other things where it's not the case, like trains. I think the US is terrible on trains. Asia is better.
Subway is another one.
Yeah, that's true. But like, I don't know, like, the newest tech gadgets are usually come out first in the US, and paying by card is very, is kind of like the default. And in Europe, it's catching up.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a very interesting and open. I could give you a couple of arguments that are exactly the opposite. Like,
yeah, that's true.
Americans are not using WhatsApp that much. Not that it's not there, but they don't do it. Not sure why.
Yeah, but they have their own. They have their own apps, right?
Yeah, kind of. But then, okay, the example of, so the point of, like, this movie-like feeling, that makes it so that your experience feels better. So my argument is, when you come back, it feels more boring because you're more used to it, and they're
it's probably true. I think Americans, when they come to Europe, they have the same thing, because they have all these movies about Europe, and whenever I meet Americans here, it's always like, oh, let's go to Paris, let's sit on the beach in Italy.
Objectively, like, there are places in the US that they're amazing, right? But there's something objectively objective about landscapes and architecture in Europe which you can't find in the US, and that's part, I think, why There's
I mean,
some,
I'm just saying it's romanticized through television. Both of them are romanticized in their own way through television. And I think Americans, they have like their Euro trip they want to do, and they want to see all these places that they think are great because they know it from TV, like Paris as being one of them, which I think is a super boring city, but that's just me. And you know, I think it's really that. I think, yeah.
You know, there's a saying, I don't know where I heard it, but I think it's very true. Let me try and phrase it in English. So the main concept is about beauty, right? Beauty in everything, architecture, landscape, people, and the saying goes something like, it's very easy to appreciate something that's beautiful, but it's very hard to spot something that's beautiful among stuff that isn't. Which is a weird thing, and I don't know if I'm translating it correctly, but the main concept is once you show something beautiful to a lot of people, and you kind of like light the spot, spot a light on it, everybody will like it because we are instinctively drawn towards beauty. But
you're saying it's because it's been pointed out.
That makes it easier to, like, if you, in a way,
okay.
it makes it easier to experience it, like to see it. And if you across, like, among stuff that is less beautiful, is very, like, you need to be kind of like attuned to it to spot something beautiful. It's like, the example is, you know, those markets, those little how they call, like, fairs, like where you have vintage clothes or vintage furniture. I don't know if you've ever been in one of.
Like a flea market?
Yeah, like a flea market, exactly. So in those markets, you have a lot of rubbish, and then you have some very, very nice things.
Okay.
But in the mess of, like, a mix of things, not everyone is good at spotting the beautiful thing. Then once you take it out of the context, which is not a great context because you have a lot of rubbish, immediately, and you shine a light on it, like, immediately, it's, you see it for what it is. Anyway, it's an interesting aspect. I think it applies to cities as well, and I think there's another thing that's a clear difference. At least, like, in Italy, we have a lot of amazing architecture, but the way we are keeping it, like maintaining it, is not up to par, I think, with what we have. While in other places, they have fewer amazing architecture, but they take care of them very well, and so ultimately, like, that has an impact when you live in a city that it's well maintained, because kind of like it brings more value to the good.
I think. I mean, I don't want to stray too far from the subject, but, like, I think just one thought on beauty. I think beauty is subjective, right? That's my opinion, at least. Because I don't find most European cities particularly beautiful. I think, like, many people say, "Oh, Rome is so beautiful, Paris is so beautiful." I don't agree. I don't find them beautiful.
So controversial, like it.
But it doesn't matter, right? Like, the point is, so, for example, you can look at a building. I mean, I told you in the previous episode, I don't care about buildings. I think, you can look at a nicely ornamented building in Paris and, like, be impressed by it. I'm usually not. I think maybe because it's drowned out by all these other stuff. But for example, I think, like, if you zoom in New York, it's kind of ugly because, like, it's not well maintained, it's dirty and so on. But I think the skyline is beautiful. And I think actually the buildings in New York are way more impressive than the buildings in Paris, for example. I don't know if you call it beautiful. I think there are things that I think are beautiful in New York. I think, like, the bridges are beautiful. I think Central Park, Central Park in between, like, all the skyscrapers, I think looks super cool. I don't know if it's beautiful. Well, for me, it's beautiful. But
then why? Like, I asked myself, like, a few weeks ago, I was in New York, right? And I've seen for a few days, and I've seen those places before. And I was asking myself, like, why do I like the skyline so much? And, it's in a way, it's kind of like the triumph of humanity. Like, it's like, okay, this is man-made, first of all. So, like, but then mountains are beautiful as well, and they're not man-made. So I don't think that's it. It's the size of it. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of big things that are not beautiful. Yeah. So it's not it. Like, I was trying to interrogate myself, like, why do I like it? Because it's true. Like,
I can tell you for me, I think there's two reasons why I consider something beautiful. And I don't even know if beautiful is the right thing. Maybe impressive also. I don't know. I think one thing is that if it's, well, what I said, impressive, if you think it took effort, right? So for example, in terms of art, and this is going really far from the subject, but like in terms of art, I think like most modern art doesn't speak to me at all. I think, for example, if I look at Dali, I think it's like beautiful because you can tell how much work it was and like how much skill it took. I mean, at least to me, right? I'm not an art expert, but some other things, like if you go to MoMA, some of the things I'm like, what is this? Like, I could have done this in 10 seconds.
Yeah, but there's a contrary argument to that, which is way more conceptual. I'm not an expert, but that's a disclaimer. But it's way more conceptual, modern art. So like you need to understand the meaning of things. The fact that it took like very little to make doesn't mean anything, because
it was just an example. Like, so I didn't want to get into art. I'm just saying, like, in terms of buildings, I'm like, if I feel like it's impressive because it took effort to make it, right? That's one thing. And I think the other thing, and I think it's fairly related, is that it's different. I think if every city looked like New York wouldn't be impressive.
That's a good argument.
I think New York is impressive because it's different, right? And I think this goes back to the whole argument between the US and Europe. I think everything that looks different to what you're used to is going to seem interesting to you. And to me, most European cities are similar to each other on the grand scale of things. And I find them fairly boring. And I find American cities and Asian cities more interesting, probably because I'm not used to them. Probably if I grew up in the States or in Asia, I would think differently, and I would think Paris is super beautiful. But I just happen to have grown up here, and I don't find Paris to be beautiful. But actually, for me, the most beautiful cities are the ones that are neither. I think the most beautiful cities for me are the ones that are super, that are actually super interesting because they're different from everything I've seen. So, for example, I think good examples are like Rio. I think Rio is super beautiful just because, like, it's the city blends so well with nature. I think Singapore is super interesting and super beautiful. I think Kuala Lumpur is super beautiful. I think Lisbon, of all the European cities, I think Lisbon is the most beautiful city, because like how the city blends with the landscape. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it does. I think the originality of it like makes it stand out, and then potentially makes it. But again, something original is not necessarily beautiful. So I think we're getting into the definition rabbit hole. But ultimately, I get your point of something that's different from what you used to ultimately becomes interesting to you. Maybe not beautiful necessarily, because it might not be like, it's hard to. I think for a city to be beautiful, it's a combination of like the vibe of the city, the kind of people that live in it, and the landscape and everything else, right?
Yeah.
The effort aspect, I'm not sure, because if you look at a mountain, like, it's arguable. What's the like effort from who? Like it's
no, in that case it isn't, but it's. Yeah. I mean, it can still be impressive.
Still, nature is beautiful in a way, right? Like, and why is that? There's a lot of reasons, I think. But yeah, going back to I think it's a good point. Like, ultimately, it's fun to see how the environment affects. So I think the bigger point I see is, and it's related to traveling a lot, how the environment shapes your perception of everything you do in it, and how, like, just by changing certain aspects, your experience changes completely, although you're doing the same exact action, same exact things, like to the laundry, going to a restaurant.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think this goes back to one of the things you said earlier, and also I think one of the main reasons that travel is so impactful, that it changes your frame of reference, right? So you're very used to something, and then you go somewhere and you see like a complete extreme of something that you haven't witnessed before, and your entire like scale changes, right? So like, the best example is going from a small place to a big place. It's always going to suddenly seem really small when you come back, because like your entire scale changed, right? You have a completely different ruler suddenly. What you thought was big is not big anymore, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Sorry, go ahead.
No, the same is true for other things, like cultural offerings, like how people can be, like you think, oh, for example, I used to not notice how rude Germans are until I've been, until I went to countries where people are extremely friendly. And it's like it didn't bother me when I was younger because that's how everyone was. And now I'm like super bothered by it because like why can't you guys be nice and happy? And now it's bothering me. But this is good and bad, right? Because now we have this whole grass is always greener thing where we're like, oh, it was so good in the other place.
Yeah, and then you want a patchwork of the best thing you've seen in the different places. I mean, the point of what's possible, like experiencing what's possible, it's a great point because the more you travel, the more you figure out that other people thought of the same thing in a different way or approached life in a different way. And that's about learning about different cultures. And ultimately you come back enriched by that. And we talked about it, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But also, this gives me generally, and that's why I love traveling, the more I do it, to a certain point, I guess, a drive to do things. Because the more I see other approaches to life, other things that are getting done, it gives me ideas, inspiration, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so I'm like, I need to like stop, go back and do some things that just came to mind that I want to do. And that's
again,
funny.
it gives you new reference points, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the smallest scale is you get on a car or on a train, even better, because you don't have, you're a passenger in a car or you're in a train, same thing, right? And you look out of the window and like you're moving and you see a lot of different things in a short amount of time. That generally, I mean, at least my personal experience, but I think it's something like relatable. You get, it's a good form of like, it's good for your thought process. It helps you thinking and it helps
actually I think this thing is called visual flow, and I think Huberman talks about it a lot. He says, this is like one of the reasons that I started doing the walks in the morning. And he says, generating visual flow. I forgot what he said exactly. I think he says it releases endorphins or something. I don't know. Like to have like countryside move past your eyesight, kind of. And he says it's good for you.
Yeah, then okay, that's backed by science. That's great. So
it's backed by Huberman. I don't know if it's backed by science.
Oh yeah, these days you never know. But but yes, it's funny because again, it's something you can do that changes your perspective, and there's something in it. The fact that you kind of like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Like you experience a lot of different things in a short amount of time, which is just
it's life on fast forward, right? But actually, so this is actually why I loved going to Asia by train, because you really get a sense of the scale of the trip you're doing, and it's not like when you get on a plane and then get off, it's like I don't know, teleportation. You're like suddenly you're somewhere else. But like taking the train to go to China is like you really get a sense of like how far away China is, because you see you see how the landscape changes, and like you're just going for days and days. You're going on the train, and like slowly it's changing, but it's really far, right? And I thought it was really impressive, and this impact. Yeah.
Also, the experience of that's another good point you raised. Like the experience of like you get off of a plane. It's a very peculiar experience. Like especially when you travel when the temperature changes a lot, right? You move from
the time zone,
right? It always, to me, I always find it like very close to when you wake up in the morning. Maybe because I sleep in a plane, maybe that's a point. But I think it's interesting because it's like you wake up from something else because you're in a different landscape.
Suddenly, like teleportation. Yeah,
that's a good point.
But actually, so I wanted to ask, because I think this is kind of what we said in the very beginning, to talk about like actual trips and how they were impactful for us. I mean, I talked about my train trip to Asia, and it was super, super impactful. And maybe you can tell me a little bit about like which trips that you've done in your life were like the most impactful and why.
I think I'm with you on the Asia part of the world. I think a couple of trips in Asia kind of like changed my view of life in a way. And one was when I lived in South Korea. So there, I think I spent like 6 months, and I had what they call a cultural shock. So kind of like when you arrive and back in the days, it was 2012, I think, something like that. So it was a long time ago. they barely spoke English. Like very few people spoke English. So there was a communication problem, which is part of the culture shock. And there was food was, I mean, I was used to let's say the westernized Asian food, right?
Yeah.
Japanese food, Chinese food, which is not the one they actually, I mean, some things are the same, but like it's really a bit different. And Korean food is something else. In terms of spices, like it's really different from.
Yeah, I think especially if the only Asian food you've been exposed to is in Southern Europe, because they tend to make it much milder, right?
Yeah.
Like I always think about that when I'm in Spain. I don't know about Italy, but in Spain it's like you basically cannot get any Asian food in Spain. Like there's Asian restaurants, but none of the things they serve taste anything like what you get in Asia. And I mean, in particular because of the spice levels, because Spaniards, I don't know about Italians, but Spaniards cannot tolerate any spiciness. So it's like, even the spiciest dish there is like, it's not going to make you sneeze.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think south of Italy has some good spicy recipes, so we're a bit more used to it, but still, like, it's not a regular thing. And one big thing in terms of food that I realized there is that they used to have their specific restaurant at specific things they serve, like one kind of like a niche of food. So generally you go to a European restaurant, you have a menu, you have like all kind of different like food, right? And there my experience was I found this also in China and Korea. Like you have one restaurant does one thing, a few variations, but that's one thing. Not that you don't have the bigger restaurant, but it's a cultural thing. So that was very interesting because you go there because you want to eat that thing, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So that's interesting. But so the culture shock was food, the spiciness of it, and the lack of communication possibilities, and I guess another aspect. I was in Seoul. Seoul is huge, but it wasn't really the size of it that was it was an issue. But it's technologically is used to be already very. I think now it's even more. I don't know, but what I read about it, and it was very advanced technologically. So like you had a lot of technology everywhere, and the sound of it, like it's not a thing that in Europe you would have. You literally had like shops having jingles outside to attract shoppers, and you had like the GPS in the car, in the taxi, that was like doing all sorts of different sounds, and I was like, it was crazy because so the sound of the city was very different from what I was used to as well. The landscape maybe, but it was not like drastically different. I think it's a modern city, so skyscrapers. So and then also you have the aspect that the population is very different, right? So like in Europe, you're mostly used to see people with traits that are like, I wouldn't say European, but like similar, and they're like, it's everybody is Asian, and no, but that's a thing that's very interesting because initially I wasn't able to recognize the different. I think it's the same as a person from the US or from a country in Asia comes to Europe and sees a Spanish guy and an Italian guy, and like wouldn't be able to recognize the difference, or a German guy. But then if you live in Europe, you kind of guess it. Maybe you're not 100% right? It's not easy. But like there are some physical traits that are of specific cultures, right? And so it was very interesting because then I started understanding, like the physical traits of like people come from China, from Japan, from Korea, Indonesia, Taiwan. And so it's part of learning about the culture, but mostly it was communication. I think when you're in a place and you can't communicate properly, that is a shock already.
I think traveling to Asia was, I mean, for me also was super impactful, also because it was so long. But some places in Asia really feel like you're traveling to the future, because it doesn't, I mean, in particular, like the big cities in Eastern Asia, I think it's like everything is so much more techy, I think, than here in some ways. And I think it's no coincidence that many like sci-fi movies depict cities like like what Tokyo and so on
Yeah.
look like right now. And it's funny because, like, you know, I think there's a certain kind of superior I can't pronounce that, superiority that Europeans and Americans feel in the world. But I think it's like, in many ways, you know, if you travel Asia, you'll see that they're much more advanced than we are in many ways. I mean, just like Germany, for example, is so terrible at certain things. Like, I think the trains are terrible. I think the cellular network is really terrible, and I think there's just things that don't work well. And in some Asian countries, it works much better. I know there's like reasons for that, but for me, actually, the biggest culture shock was China. You've been to China, right?
Yes.
I think China, everything that you just mentioned, just more extreme, because like no one speaks English. The entire technology infrastructure is completely kind of like orthogonal to whatever we're using, because like basically all the Western apps are blocked, right? So like you have no Google Maps, you have no Google Translate. You need VPN to do anything really. They have their entire like payment infrastructure, like WeChat and what they're called, I don't know, all these things that won't work for you. And it was just so crazy. Like the first week I was there, I was so stressed out because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't pay with a Western card anywhere. I couldn't even take money out of the ATM. I could not get a WeChat account, so I couldn't use any of their technology because it just wouldn't work. And it was like, I was really frustrated for like a week or so. But then, you know, once you get used to it and you figure out like your little hacks, like it was incredible. I think there's like so much to discover in China, like culturally, but also, I mean, just like landscape and technology. It was like crazy, like the trains and you know, the cities and all the stuff that they have.
Yeah, and it's empowering, right? Like once you get to understand how that works, the a new situation like that, then I think those are some of the situations where you learn the most about yourself.
It's like you unlock a new level in a video game, right? And I think this is kind of like what travel does to you. Like sometimes you travel, especially solo trips, when you like really, there's like a really big struggle you have, and once you like get over it, it's like unlocking a new level in a video game.
Yeah, and also, but that speaks to the fact that I really think experiencing places like a local is the way to unlock that, because if you travel like a tourist, you can potentially, to this day, there are very few countries where you cannot have the same level of comfort and amenities and experience, and also similar experience.
I think those countries exist, but yeah.
No, there are a few though. Like they exist, but like you can go in like a lot of countries and live in like you find that kind of hotel where you sleep the same way, you eat the same way, right? Like you drive around the city with a cab, and that maybe changes a bit, but so the problem is
it's like the North Korea experience, right? You go with a guided tour and you do exactly the things they tell you and nothing else. You cannot go outside of the planned itinerary.
You don't really experience the place. You experience the same thing in another place. Yeah,
it's funny. I just watched this video on YouTube about the American military and why it's so huge, right? It's like the biggest military in the world by spending and everything. And they have military bases in basically every country in the world. Like there's like thousands of military bases. And they showed videos of the different military bases, and it's really funny because like you're in the middle of like the Middle East or like somewhere in Africa or like on some Pacific island or something. And inside of the military base, everything is American. Like they have like a McDonald's and a Shake Shack and I don't know, like a, you know, Kentucky Fried Chicken and like everything is Americanized. Like they have little stores that are American, all American products, and they want the soldiers to feel at home. So like inside of that, you know, enclave, it's completely Americanized, and they wouldn't like. They don't have any they don't need to have any contact with the local culture at all.
Yeah, and I mean, it is an issue. I think it's easier. That's the problem, and so you know people tend to go that way, but you lose in experience. And I think one thing to close on, since we're running out of time, is and maybe we can have a third episode if we want. Let's see. But it's a very interesting topic. There's a person once told me like I think it's an interesting sentence, like I don't want to travel to a place, or it's not really like it said something like I don't want to be when I travel be in a situation that's less comfortable than the way I am at home. And I feel like it's not accurate to me. Like, I mean, I understand that people might want to do this, but it's exactly the opposite of experiencing it. Because if you experience something new and you travel to a place that's new, you will feel less comfortable for sure. And that's part of it. And it's part of the experience. Of course, the length of it is another element, another aspect. But I think how much you want to stay uncomfortable. But I think it's part of the process, and then you ultimately get comfortable in a new situation, and that's what, as we said, unlocks.
So, yeah, I also think that, you know, like we talked about the grass is always greener effect, and, you know, like complaining about the things at home, but you can have the opposite effect too, because if you go to a country where people are really suffering, or like you're suffering for whatever reason, the coming home part can give you a lot of gratitude, right? Like if you've been to a country where like everyone is poor or there's war or whatever, or maybe, I mean, this was the case for me actually. So I was traveling through Asia, and I didn't have a good hot shower in months. Yeah. Like I had like a trickle, or like it wasn't super hot or whatever. And then the first time I had like a nice hot shower, it was amazing. I was full of gratitude for this amazing shower. Like it kind of like faded away, but the first weeks of being back home, I was like, the shower is like the best thing. It was like my favorite thing of the day. Just taking a hot shower, it was so great.
Yeah, to me that lasts even less. I had the same experience, and the thing is, you have hot water when you want, right? Or you have a bathroom for yourself. I don't know why.
Or you can drink the tap water. That's actually amazing. Yeah. Like so many places in the world, like
around bathroom.
Like,
but
yeah. No, sanitation is amazing. Like we have to be more grateful for sanitation.
Yeah. That and a good bed. That's another one, right?
Yeah,
like
for sure.
When you travel, because you're not used to the bed, you always feel less comfortable, unless you're really in a place where like. But even then, you will feel less comfortable. So yeah, and I think it's part of it, and it's good like this, and it's good. Yeah, exactly. When you come back, at least you have that spike of like, I'm back home. Which is,
again, this is the frame of reference again, right?
Yeah.
Actually, before we close, I want to like do one quick round of like favorite place in terms of culture, favorite place in terms of food, favorite place in terms of maybe how, you know, landscape or what impressed you, and then favorite place overall. So 4 categories.
Wow. Okay. You first.
You don't have to give the reason, just like you can. I mean, you can if you want. So I said food, culture, landscape, and then favorite place overall.
Okay. To be more vague, I'll talk about continents. So I think food-wise, Asia.
Yeah, for sure.
What's the other one?
But I mean, Asia is like, you can't be more specific than Asia.
Yeah, but then I haven't experienced all Asia, so that's another point.
Yeah, obviously it's about the ones you've had.
Yeah, I mean, again, going far from what I know, because the food like in Italy is probably, I don't want to start a competition here, but like probably some of the best in the world for simplicity and everything. But the richness of flavor, I think, is unparalleled in Asia. Specifically, I tried, Chinese, Japanese food, Korean food. Yeah, richness of flavor, even Indonesian, which you.
For me, I think Malaysia was top for food, followed by China.
Interesting.
Okay. Next.
What was the next one?
Culture.
Culture. I want to stay close to home. I think European culture to me is a good balance of everything.
Okay. Any particular country?
South European, of course.
Okay. I mean, I actually concur with you a little bit. I think South European culture to me is, I mean, I can't say better and worse, but like it's the one I connect with more. But I think some countries I feel even more connected to. I think like Brazil for me is like, I love Brazilians. I love everything, like the music, the art, but also like, I think the warmth of Brazilians is like beyond anything you experience in Europe. And for sure in other countries. Yeah.
So South American.
Yeah, but South American, but I think Brazil in particular. I think Brazilians are just amazing.
Interesting. And what's the last one?
I think nature, landscapes, similar things.
Nature, landscape is a good one. I would say the US.
Okay. I should have visited more stuff in the US. I wasn't taking advantage. But the stuff I see is very impressive. For me, I think it's China. I think some of the national parks in China are just like, it feels like you're on a different planet. It's so impressive. I'm sure the US also has stuff like that. So I think my top 5 places that I've seen, 3 of them are in China.
Okay, I can see that. Interesting. Okay, that's a good point. I think we can take it from here next time. But yeah,
no, it's going to become a travel podcast.
Yeah, no, but I'm sure we get other ideas. But
yeah. All right, man.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good one. Bye bye.